Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the talk. My name is Stephen Augustus, as was mentioned just now. I'm the head of open source at Cisco, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a cool little tool called Scorecard. So an open book test. We're going to talk about this open book test. So who am I? We just did that. But in addition to being head of open source at Cisco, I'm part of the Kubernetes steering committee. I'm part of the OpenSSF governing board, and I'm one of the co-founders of Inclusive Naming Initiative. That's all the big, fancy, open sourcey things. But I'm also a maintainer. So I'm a maintainer for OpenSSF Scorecard, for DEX, which is another security project. Kubernetes I've been doing for quite some time now. So currently I am a SIG chair for, I forgot to put the SIG release. So my team is responsible for clicking the button that pushes Kubernetes out to the community and the world every quarter, every month when we do patch releases. And finally, so I founded the release engineering project because we had that need. And it's kind of coming from being a recovering SRE and production engineer. So maintaining things all the way down. So what does that mean? My mindset is I like to get people together and solve problems at the same time. Do it once, do it well, learn from the mistakes together, right? So I think we've all seen this quote at some point in time that software is eating the world, has eaten the world. But I think the corollary is that open source is eating software, right? Open source is pervasive throughout not just software ecosystems, but through the world, right? They're running healthcare tech. They're running something that's on your phone right now. They're running technology that's in my laptop. And the advent of public and highly available and low-cost code forges like a GitHub, like a GitLab, et cetera, in addition to open source licenses, even means that's happening at an accelerated pace. Right? So spooky, scary. This is scary. It's good because we've got more software out there. We're learning more things. But with most software comes more problems, right? So within the last few years, you've probably seen things like SolarWinds and Log4j and colors and fakers and all of these different software supply chain attacks that are kind of popping up. And one of the things that it comes down to is like ecosystem sustainability, right? And I'm purposely keeping it very high level because there are a million talks that you can go and watch about either those explicit attacks, the mitigation paths for those attacks, how we can get better in the future across the open source ecosystem. But those attacks and the need for ecosystem sustainability is garnering more attention from enterprises. It's garnering more attention from the government. And I put the S in caps because we've got all kinds of governments across the world, and they've all got their own ideas about how to execute on open source software and whatever that might mean. So we're going to take a brief interlude and pop up some XKCD comics that you've probably seen. The first one is xkcd.com/dependency. And that is so much of the software in the world kind of comes down to like there's some maintainer somewhere spending their off hours, their nights and weekends, their work time, keeping this running, right? And I think one of the really interesting scenarios right now is etcd. And etcd is a bigger project, I think, than the current attention that's being paid to it. So I'm a former CoreOS employee, so etcd is near and dear to my heart. For anyone who uses Kubernetes, you should know that it's the brains of Kubernetes. So a maintainability problem, a sustainability problem in etcd means a lot of sad users across anyone who's consuming Kubernetes, anyone who's building services on top of Kubernetes. And the second XKCD one is /standards. So I think as we're having enterprises enter the conversation, as we're having governments enter the conversation, everyone's like, we need a standard, we need a policy for this. There needs to be guidelines and practices, and we're going to inject ourselves into these communities and kind of tell them how it's supposed to be. When that happens, multiply that by n enterprises and governments, and you've got that standard situation. Here's how I think it should be, and now we've got another idea of how we think it should be, right? So 15 times x, right? So what are we going to do about it? So I want to talk about the OpenSSF really quick. I'll try to keep it brief, but because Scorecard is part of the OpenSSF, it would behoove me to do a quick blurb on it. So the OpenSSF is responsible for, their mission is to help secure open source software across the ecosystem. So across initiatives, across tools and processes that they create, across partnering with existing programming language ecosystems, as well as there's a really interesting project called Criticality Score within OpenSSF that is focused on trying to identify the criticality of a software component, right? So we have like extensive data sets that are running in BigQuery that you can query to get an idea of how we're perceiving, and really that's driven by the consumption from direct dependencies, right? So more direct dependencies that you have, it's more critical, right? I think that's up for debate, right? But that's what this foundation is for. It is a directed fund of the Linux Foundation. So there's that. And here's a thing that I said one time in some press release. We have a responsibility as technology leaders to make sure that we're deploying software safely and doing it in a way that's also not compromising the user experience, right? So what does that mean to me? I think it means, again, let's go back to, let's create another standard, right? Let's define some policy, let's deliver tooling that's gonna help organizations build software safely. And I think the difference with doing this in the open source context is that information is freely available. That information is users are enabled, consumers are enabled to build on top of that, right? So we'll do maybe show of hands. We'll do some audience participation, right? Are any of you direct consumers of open source software and concerned about the security of the projects that you use? All right, that's just about the full room. Okay, so maybe you're an open source maintainer and you want to provide a delightful and safe experience to your consumers. Anybody? All right, all right. Or perhaps you're a strategic decision maker at a company where your team is in charge of making decisions on what open source gets released as well as what open source you consume. So I happen to be all three, right? All right, we get to the point. We're here to talk about OpenSSF Scorecard. We're going to start talking about it now. So what is OpenSSF Scorecard? I'm going to leave that up for a second so you can see what the link is. I would have done QR codes, but I'm not that cool. So OpenSSF Scorecard is basically, it's a tool for assessing the posture of open source projects, right? It was primarily built on GitHub, so you'll see a lot of the language is around GitHub, but we're also building in support for GitLab little by little, and building in support for more software ecosystems. So the reason I call this talk an open book test is there are checks. Scorecard runs, as the name implies, it kind of comes back with a scorecard of a series of checks within your project, right? And kind of tells you, all right, well, this is you've got vulnerabilities in this project, go fix them, right? That's going to be a higher weighted check than the rest of them. Maybe you're missing a security policy, and yes, super important. Maybe you're missing some community health files, still super important. But the danger to your project is a little higher in, say, I'm not doing static code analysis. I'm not patching my vulnerabilities. I'm not ensuring that there is, we're doing code reviews, or we're having multiple code reviews, or we're having multiple code reviews from people that belong to different organizations. So the tests are back, but they're going to be open book tests. Scorecard is not only going to tell you what's wrong, it's going to tell you how to fix it. And I should have written more slides. Like, I'm moving through this. So what does that mean? What are we actually checking for? And I won't go exhaustive again because we're running about 20 checks, and there are more coming in every day. But briefly, some of the things that I mentioned, do we have checked-in binaries? Because checked-in binaries are potentially very bad, right? There's some projects that you kind of need checked-in binaries for in certain ecosystems, but we also have exception rules and stuff for, say, jar files that may need to live in your repo, right? Is your project using branch protection? Because you should. Wouldn't it be fun if someone just pushed to your main branch, right? And if you haven't renamed your main branches, you should, right? Are you actually running tests against your project? Are you doing code reviews for your project, right? And there are ways to check that against the GitHub API pretty easily. And then are you keeping your dependencies up to date, right? So are you using things like, insert tool here, but Dependabot for one example, right? There's more. There's more. Is the project maintained, right? And I think, again, this is one of those fuzzy checks where we're not going to ding you as hard on it because maybe the project just started. Maybe it's a project that doesn't need much maintenance, right? Maybe you built something that it's a data set, right? It's a point in time. It's a research paper. It's something that if a vulnerability comes around, like, yeah, sure, I've got to patch it, but the commits day by day are not going to be that much, right? Are you signing your releases? Again, vulnerabilities, more things about vulnerabilities. Are you doing things like allowing each of your action steps within GitHub Actions to access tokens? Because that's bad, don't do that. Again, Scorecard is going to flag that for you, right? And much, much more. I say much, much more because I want you to go to the repo and check it out, and there's so much more. So Scorecard in action, because I've been talking about it, and I hope this is visible enough. I tried to make it large, but I'll describe what's happening on the screen as well. Scorecard in action in GitHub Actions. Whoa. So that's the link to, github.com/OSSF/scorecard-action is the link to our GitHub action, which you can search within GitHub code scanning and add the action to your workflow, like add a workflow for that action today, right? And what you get is within the code scanning UI, it's going to list, it's going to periodically run, it's got a cron schedule, and you can decide what that schedule is going to be. And it will periodically run and then come back with, here's what happened in your repo, right? So this repo in particular, this is a project that I am trying to bring back to life that does GitHub syncing from like GitHub issues into Jira, because I need that, and I don't like that I need that. But if you need that too, it's uwu-tools/Jira issue sync. So it flagged on this repo that I've got some problems with code review, and you can see that it's flagged this as high, right? So the deeper orange and then the lighter orange are high and medium, respectively. So it's flagged code review. It's flagged the fact that I don't have a fuzzer in place. It's also flagged the fact that I don't have a badge. I don't have the CII best practices badge, which is actually now the OpenSSF best practices badge. But it's flagged all of that stuff. So I'm like, cool, how do I fix it? Great. If I go to the next screen, if I click into any one of these alerts, Boom, and of course, you can't see that, and I'm sorry for that, but I'll read it out. I'll squint a little, and I'll read it out. So remediation, show more below. There's much more below that describes exactly what the check does. But what it said is that the score is 7. 16 out of the last 22 change sets reviewed before merge. And then the score was normalized, right? So it wants me to go click into the remediation and see what I can do. This is a repo that I essentially maintain by myself, so there is going to be no code review. But again, if you have need for that and want to come maintain that with me. And further, below the fold of this picture, it kind of says that, right? If here are some scenarios where you might expect the score to be a little lower, right? Your single maintainer situation or minimal maintainer situation. But some of the remediation steps it mentions is, it actually says it. So if the project only has one contributor or does not have enough reviewers to practically require that all contributions be reviewed, try to recruit more maintainers to the project who will be willing to review others' work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The next bullet is follow security best practices by performing strict code reviews for every new pull request, merge request, and make code reviews mandatory in your repository configuration, right? And if you don't have a means of doing that today, there's a Probot settings app that you can drop a settings.yaml on your repo and configure the repo automatically, basically by pull request. So basically, all of my repos have at a baseline like a code owners, a settings.yaml file, of course, pre-submits, and we've also got All-Star running, which I'll talk about in a second, and Scorecard running across each of the repos, right? So I generally try to do things that'll prevent me from shooting myself in the foot. Linters too. Don't forget your linters. So what do we got? We've got a bunch of things going on. We've got a lot of prominent users for this tool, including TensorFlow, Angular, Flutter, sos.dev, and deps.dev. So deps.dev is leveraging the Scorecard API behind the scenes. So if you've ever been to that site and want to analyze dependencies, you can do so. They're using Scorecard. What else? That public data set that I was talking about. I think I maybe didn't underscore it enough. There are over 1 million projects in that data set right now, open source projects. And you can go check out how they're stacking up. We've got more stuff. We've got more stuff. We've got a REST API. Ooh, no one? There's a CLI tool. So if you're just getting started with Scorecard and want to give it a run, you can do so via the CLI tool or the container images. Run that locally. I think this also opens up the possibility if you want to run this internally, right? You may have projects that are not quite open source per se, right? You can do local scans of repositories as well, right? Cool. No one sounds excited. Are you not excited about REST APIs? So we've got friends too. All-Star is another OpenSSF project, and it is a project that will allow us to set and enforce security policies. So some of the questions that All-Star will ask you is when you install it so you install it on the org level, and you can decide if it's going to be installed for all repositories or just a subset of them. And it will do some of the checks it defers to Scorecard's API, right? So if you have binaries checked into your repo, All-Star will come by, depending on how you configure it, All-Star will come by and open an issue on your repo and say like, hey, you got binaries checked in, like what's going on with that? And it will just keep hammering the maintainers until the issue is closed. It'll do the same for, say you're missing a security policy, right? So if anyone does not have a security policy in place, you don't need to put it on all of your repos. If you start a .github repo and include it in like the docs folder, that will get inherited to all of your repos as well, right? So it reports in on some of those things, and it kind of ensures that the repo maintainers will come back and take a look. Now we've got a tool in a similar vein, but I think this is kind of deeper, right? In that if you wanted to run reports across all of your organizations and have it in Markdown or JSON, you can do that too with Scorecard Monitor. I recently found out about this one, and I was like, hey, do you want to donate that to the project and then come maintain this with us? And that's the beauty of open source, right? You discover something new, and then you bring more people in, and you're stronger than you were when you started, right? So cool. Scorecard Monitor. We still got more friends. Step Security Harden Runner. So that's app.stepsecurity.io. And that will allow you to, say you've got a GitHub action, and you're not quite sure how to configure it, or you're pretty sure you got it right and you just want some validation, you can drop your action right into this web app, and it will go, hey, like you should be monitoring egress traffic on your runners. You should be pinning dependencies by SHA instead of by version number, right? You should be. Those are the big ones. Those are the big ones that it does. Yeah. But really cool thing. I basically, for all of my repos, I do a quick once over. A lot of this is copy paste, but I do a quick once over in this app just to make sure I've got it right. And this also sets you up for success if you're using something like Dependabot, right? Because the first scan of Dependabot, like there's a very annoying thing that will happen where there will be version comments, and if you get the version comment wrong once, like it'll just be wrong every time Dependabot bumps. So it's a nit, but it's very annoying to me. So this will help you get it right the first time. They've also got another tool called Secure Repo. And Secure Repo is, again, you kind of plug in, this time you plug in a repo, and it's using Scorecard behind the scenes to come back with all of the recommendations, and then it's going to help you actively remediate those recommendations, whether by pull request, whether by bubbling up that remediation information to you. Pretty cool. I haven't had a chance to play around with this one as much, but I love some of the things that are happening like in our space. And I love tools where you don't have to do the work over and over. Like we're all having the same conversations, and I think part of the reason that I started in the Scorecard project was going back to that corporate side, being responsible for releasing open source at Cisco. One of the requirements, and for a lot of people who are in OSPOs or running OSPOs, open source program offices, if you're not familiar with the term, they have to do some sort of review, right? And either the review is going to be a very lightweight review, things within this license, if we've signed a corporate CLA for X, if it is this kind of license, don't do this, if it's a copyleft license, et cetera, right? So there are some baseline rules we may have in place, but I think there's still some technical review that we do, especially, and I think we take extra care in situations where we know they're a first-time maintainer, right? We want to make sure that they're set up for success. Not only is it I think open source is magical because it's this career advancement opportunity, right? You get to kind of put your resume out in public, and in working in open source, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with like just being messy, just like breaking things in public, and I think building up that muscle is huge. But you don't have it. You don't have it to start. So we want to set those maintainers up for success by putting some of these guardrails in place and also having conversations and training with them. But we also don't want to repeat the conversation, right? So that becomes documentation, that becomes training materials, that becomes automated enforcement of certain things, like all of the tools I've mentioned here. So what's next? I'm going to just freeze on this for a while. You got to go secure your repos. If you're not doing it today, if all of this sounds novel to you, please check out the project. There's at least like one sliver of it that you can use, and it's near and dear to my heart. because I'm a maintainer, but I feel feel that way about all my projects. So yeah, check it out. Start, subscribe, like, subscribe. Check out the release notes. Join our community meetings. Join our Slack. Learn how to contribute. And you're like, how am I going to do that? Well, that's the next slide, right? So I'm going to leave that up for a bit too. So yeah, so there is an OpenSSF Slack. We have a series of working groups where, so the way it's structured is there's a governing board, there is a technical advisory council, there are a set of working groups and special interest groups throughout the OpenSSF to kind of execute on various functions, right? So the scorecard in particular kind of rolls into the best practices working group, right? And kind of all of the derivative projects are part of that best practices working group. But we have our own community meetings, and we meet bi-weekly on Thursday at 4 Eastern. I didn't want to put it here just in case it changed, but you can find that on the contribution link above. And we're on Slack, and you can discover all the other tools that are happening in that ecosystem there. Now, if you want to connect with me, I'm in various places on the internet, GitHub, LinkedIn, Mastodon, Twitter, the website kind of aggregates all of that stuff. And wow, yeah, I think that's me. So, questions?